So like a couple of jets going by certainly wouldn't create like an entirely overcast sky by themselves.
You kind of screw with their weather by putting stuff into the atmosphere and basically put them at a disadvantage tactically.
If the goal were to have them stick around and do something nefarious, you would want that to happen in a lower altitude, not a higher one, because
a certain subsect of people that believe there's some kind of substance added into there, that there's like this chemical spraying like aluminum and barium and stuff that's being dumped out for God knows what reason, like killing people, killing, plants or animals, or making us go crazy or something.
Welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe and all that good stuff. And for kitchen sink's sake, hang out till the end of the show because we write our own music and we feature it at the end of the show. I'm Casey.
Oh, yeah. And I'm Eric Rosenblatt, as everybody knows.
Because we're really famous now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's on your minds today?
Well, so I was going through a bunch of old photographs from years ago. Just kind of I kind of do that, go back and look through stuff and that kind of thing. But I found a series of pictures that I did in 2011, and it was kind of a strange thing. This might be a little bit of a long story, but maybe this will be a short episode. So we'll see. So a couple of years before that, I started planting crops and growing crops in the backyard. And so I paid attention to the weather and temperatures and all this stuff because it was a big deal. Like you kind of need to know that stuff when you're growing things. You have to keep up with that. But in 2011, I planted a bunch of crops and stuff, and I was expecting things to go great. But I noticed that it was like super cloudy and cool. Like it was a super cool summer. I don't know if you remember that. It was like it barely got above 70 every single day. And I was like, oh man, what is going on? And so, but I started to notice patterns because I was kind of watching the weather and stuff. And I noticed like in the morning, it would be clear, and midday, it would be super cloudy. And then it would clear up at night, and then the same cycle would repeat. But then I started to notice, well, wait a minute. There's sort of a correlation between that and aircraft traffic. Like I would see ConTrails across the sky, and then they'd kind of like expand and then eventually turn into this haze that covered the whole sky. And the day would be nice and cool for some reason. And well, I mean, it was overcast the whole day. And so I started taking pictures of it and kind of investigating it, like, what's this all about? And is anybody else noticing this kind of thing? And I landed into this sort of, well, I didn't land. I kind of just tumbled into this whole rabbit hole of chemtrails. And I mean, it's like, whoa, it goes deep. There's some wild ideas in there. And I mean, some of it's kind of interesting and a little bit more rational, but a lot of it goes way out there. And but it's still an interesting topic, and it's probably one we should discuss. What do you think about that?
So my primary scientific focus is biology, so I'm a little bit out of my purview, I guess. But I have done some like studying in chemistry and ages ago, I did a little bit of study in meteorology, so I don't quite remember all of it, but like I do know that like clouds can, roll in and roll out, and especially here in Washington, I mean, we see that all the time.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's how you. It's basically just like pick any weather, and that's what you're gonna
Yeah,
get.
I mean, it happened today too. Like it was
Yeah,
really nice, and then here's some rain. But
yeah.
yeah, like there's this chemical law, the ideal gas law, and it more or less says that you've got X amount of moles, or let's say particles of gas in a given volume of liquid, because the air is technically a liquid.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
uh, and to have something that comes out of a jet suddenly expand and take up the whole sky, well, like you wouldn't really be able to see it anymore. Like those particles do eventually like become one with the sky, but they disperse so far from one another that you don't see them anymore after a point. Like, so like a couple of jets going by certainly wouldn't create like an entirely overcast sky by themselves.
But here's the interesting thing, though. Because it was keeping my crops from growing, they were stunted. They were very short because they weren't getting a lot of sunlight that summer. I got really interested in it, and I thought, well, I want to because I saw a couple of time lapse videos and stuff, and I thought, well, is that for real? Like that can't be real. So I hooked up my video camera and did my own time lapse, and sure enough, the ConTrails expanded and became like kind of like cirrus clouds and very wispy thin clouds that covered the sky. I mean, that's not to say that the clouds came from the ConTrails, because cloud seeding and stuff, you can collect moisture around particles in that regard. Like I don't know that it's like the whole thing came from the ConTrail, but it's kind of an interesting thing. And here's the thing. Throughout looking into this, I've discovered there are actually some, I mean, however you feel about the tinfoil hat side of it, like, the government's like spraying chemicals to control our minds and kill us and stuff. There are some real things around this kind of concept. Geoengineering is one of them, and the idea behind that is it's kind of connected with climate change. That, well, here's a solution. Let's spread a bunch of reflective particles into the atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, and it'll reflect the sunlight back, thereby cooling the earth. And there's all kinds of papers on that subject. I don't know that it's ever been tested, but
yeah, it is. I mean, they're not doing like field testing yet, but it's definitely being looked into as a possibility. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's one idea that's being posited. But it's like they would, there would be transparency when they obviously would go out into the open air and try it for real.
Sure. And we'll get into the non-transparent side of it, because it goes a little bit deeper than that. And we know that cloud seeding is kind of similar. You're spraying aerosolized materials like silver compounds or whatever into the atmosphere in the hopes of creating clouds and rain and all that. And that we know is a thing that's been done for a long time. There's that side of it. But then if you go down a little further, there are some military documents, well, at least from the US military. I haven't looked into other countries, but they probably have their own version of this, especially Russia. But the US military kind of was interested in this concept of geoengineering as a weaponized technology to use against enemies. So you kind of screw with their weather by putting stuff into the atmosphere and basically put them at a disadvantage tactically. you can induce cloud cover and things like that. That's not hypothetical or conspiratorial. That's a real thing that they really did investigate. Whether they carried it out or not, I don't know. But that's sort of where that's one angle that a lot of people who are basically, I don't know what to call them, chemtrailists, I guess, are
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know
from.
if they have a handle exactly.
Yeah, because I'm coming from the standpoint of like I don't know one way or the other. Like I don't know, but it is something that's interesting, and I wouldn't dismiss it completely, but I definitely would not accept it.
Yeah. I mean, your initial observation about weather being altered by air traffic, I wouldn't dismiss that as a possibility. I mean, like, climate change is a very real thing, and it's directly affected by human impact.
Mm-hmm.
Like fossil fuel burning being a major piece of that.
And yeah, we'll talk about
what are aircraft doing? They're burning a bunch of fossil fuel.
Yeah, and we'll talk about climate change like on its own, because I think that that should be its own thing. Yeah, and so I kind of have like from looking into this, there's a lot of different thoughts that I have about it. Like, are they just contrails, just regular contrails that are just behaving the way they normally would based on atmospheric conditions? Is it, what are the explanations for what they call persistent contrails, which are contrails? Because in a normal situation, an aircraft contrail, oh wait, I should probably mention what a contrail is.
Condensation trail.
Yeah. So there's condensation of like basically like water vapor and unburned fuel and stuff that comes out of the back of a jet engine. And it condenses and either turns into water vapor or ice crystals, things like that. And it forms these lines behind an aircraft. Usually they don't stick around. So a lot of these people look at what the chemtrailists, I guess, investigate what's called persistent contrails. So those are the ones that spread across the whole sky and apparently turn into clouds. Or stick around for hours and hours rather than just minutes like most contrails do. So what would be the explanations for that? We don't have to necessarily get into that right now.
Well, I mean, like, for one thing, we're talking about a 30,000 foot difference in observation here. So like on the ground, it could be all nice and warm and 80 degrees, but up there it's cold.
Yeah, and
there's a completely different weather pattern.
And I'm going to get to that in a second, actually, because this is something I did actually kind of investigate this very, very deeply, and so I have quite a few ideas about it. But you're right, like the altitude certainly has a major effect on moisture, what moisture does. Absolutely.
And the air being a liquid is subject to saturation. So if people aren't really familiar with what that actually means, is basically like if you have a solution, like you're dissolving something into something else, there's this point called saturation where things just won't dissolve anymore because there's too much stuff there already. And there's this kind of tipping point. And so if the humidity on that particular day at that particular altitude is such that the saturation level like allows for or prevents a contrail from dispersing as the ideal gas law says it will, which is totally natural. Then obviously you might see a difference from day to day or from plane to plane or whatever, and those are just natural chemical reactions.
Well, and also one thing to consider too is that different aircraft are going to be using different fuel compositions, which are going to yield a different output from combustion. So you're going to have slightly different chemical compositions, and those could behave differently. Because when you burn fuel, there's stuff that comes out of it. It's not like CO2 or CO that comes out of it. There's extra things with it, and we add things to fuel. So maybe those have some effect on this, like between commercial aircraft and private aircraft and military aircraft. Maybe they use different fuels and they behave differently. It's a thought, which could yield this sort of variation. And those things have changed from the past too. Certainly, we don't have the same fuel that we used to use, so that could account.
I mean, not being a chemist, I can't fully speak to that. I know that combustion itself is just a large part of it. Like you can experience this when you go outside on a cold morning and you breathe out, like your hot breath meets cold air and there's water vapor, and that's that's something
it condenses it condenses into like a liquid at that point.
Yeah,
from a gaseous state to a liquid, I guess. It turns into little tiny particles.
Yeah, but I mean, the one thing that kind of shows you that a lot of it is basically just water and ice forming is the wing contrails.
Yeah.
That's like where this effect where like air passes over the wing in such a way that like it creates this little pocket of air where the temperature is ever so slightly lower to the point where natural moisture in the air can turn to ice, which then attracts more moisture, which also turns to ice and turns into these like tinier little contrails coming off the tips of certain wings. Depending on their shape.
Sure.
And obviously there's no fuel like coming out of the tips of the wings.
No, and they produce kind of a similar thing. But so there's more to it, and I want to kind of like give everybody their fair shake in this conversation. I mean, it's kind of probably bigger than just one episode, but there's a group of people, or I should say a certain subsect of people that believe there's some kind of substance added into there, that there's like this chemical spraying like aluminum and barium and stuff that's being dumped out for God knows what reason, like killing people, killing plants or animals, or making us go crazy or something. There's people that believe that, and they, I don't know that there's the evidence is rather weak, but they still believe it nevertheless, that there's these chemicals in there, and I don't know what to believe there. It's a little sketchy, but if somebody has evidence, I'd like to see it, because something concrete, obviously.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to collect evidence like that. I mean, we're talking about, again, 30,000 feet. Let's say there's somehow enough aluminum to cause a bunch of people harm by introducing, through breathing more than they already consume in their diet, which, I mean, we're putting aside like something that's already kind of impossible. But like, even if that were the case, I've always had this thought, like, why would the government be poisoning the air that they're breathing too? Like,
and that's a good point. And there's people who have done a bunch of tests where they test like water samples and snow samples and stuff. And I think that's kind of like you said, things disperse so much. There's no way you'd really get an accurate reading unless you were right behind the exhaust of the aircraft.
And then by the time it dissolves into the atmosphere and gets to the ground, it's like minuscule. It's like homeopathic amounts.
Which makes it stronger, right? Okay, we'll talk about that one later. Now, I wouldn't necessarily completely I think that it's possible in some way that there could be some legitimacy to the idea that the military would be doing something like this. Now, there's secret programs to do all kinds of different things that nobody knows about. Well, few people know about. So it's not going to be public information, and they're not going to follow the rules because they don't. They do what they want. And I actually tried to look this up again because I encountered this site a long, long time ago from this guy who had nothing but time on his hands, and he studied this. Like, he did a fairly proper scientific study. He used like a flight tracker and looked at all the aircraft in the area, and he looked at the sky, and he took pictures and tracked like times and how long ConTrails stuck around. I mean, it was very, very thorough. He had like all kinds of data. But one thing he noticed is the commercial aircraft did not produce as many persistent contrails as the military ones. And so it kind of makes me wonder. I mean, there's a lot more to it. I wish I had the site.
Do you happen to recall if that was like an average of military aircraft, or was it like all of them? Because like it was, the B-52 is like a massive plane, like kind of like, you know, most of the commercial aircraft. You know, they're bigger than, you know, a standard 2-seater jet. You know?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that caused me a little bit of doubt was the fact that a lot of the persistent contrails occurred at higher altitudes than everything else, but so did the military aircraft. So I don't know what to think about that. But it basically, he looked for aircraft that if they didn't have a transponder code, they're considered military aircraft at that point. And those were the ones that were like, it wasn't just a small amount. It was like most of them. And yeah, I don't, maybe it's just the altitude that had something to do with it. But it's an interesting thing, especially in light of the fact that there have been some military investigations into using geoengineering as some kind of weaponized thing. So I wouldn't put it past them to try to experiment and test it. So I don't know, but I doubt that there's any kind of like chemicals coming out. Like you said, it wouldn't really do anything.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and the altitude thing absolutely makes sense from a chemical standpoint, because the higher you go, the less dense the air is, the more saturation is allowed for.
Sure.
So they're going to stick around longer because they've really got no, you know, reason to disperse, I guess. I don't know. I'm not explaining that correctly, but you know, a proper chemist could do better, but it just makes intuitive sense, I think.
Sure, it does. To me at least.
But. Yeah, and to go even further, like if the goal were to have them stick around and do something nefarious, you would want that to happen in a lower altitude, not a higher one, because you know, the higher you go, the longer it takes to act, and the more it disperses and more dilute it becomes, you know.
And at that point, it's probably going to land somewhere in a totally different continent.
Right.
So what's the point? You'd be low altitude. Like crop dusters or something. You come right down over people.
Yeah. Assuming it just doesn't blow around forever and ever, like, you know?
Yeah. Which it could.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is one thing. I mean, I have like all kinds of sites that I've visited and kind of looked at, but one that was rather interesting, I think in 2016, somebody by the name of Christine Shearer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, conducted a mostly scientific study, probably the only one of its kind, on the whole chemtrail thing. This is like a peer-reviewed kind of thing, so this is not like bogus by any means. Now, they didn't. this is the thing. It's not something that's going to convince the diehard people because they didn't actually test. They didn't do a real in-depth scientific study. They didn't look at aircraft. They didn't test like the atmospheric conditions and take samples and things like that and do everything. It was more of a survey of experts, and experts in a couple different fields and things like that. And I highly recommend, even if you believe that ConTrails or chemtrails are actually a thing, it's not really counter, but it's really interesting. So everybody should probably read this study, and we'll put it in the description because it's probably the most thorough one that I've encountered, and it's succinct and it's also very easy to digest. So I think everybody should read it. And it was interesting because there was sort of a consensus, but it wasn't completely 100%. There were some people that diverged, and some of the answers they gave were pretty interesting. But yeah, we'll throw that in there if anybody's interested.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, so you have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, that's about all I've ever heard is, like I mean, I think we should go into the whole mind control thing in a different episode, but I come from the position that like it seems highly unlikely that could even be a thing. But
yeah,
we should go into that in its own context, I think.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like I just wonder like what possible bad thing could you do to the air that wouldn't also affect you? That right there just kind of kills it for me. Like,
yeah, we're all breathing air, and we're all kind of like,
yeah, like it's one thing to poison the well because you could drink bottled water or whatever, but to this is the water world. Like, you don't have air in a can or something. Like,
yeah, exactly. Wait, that wasn't Waterworld. That was Spaceballs.
Was it, what?
Yeah, Spaceballs. Perrier, actually.
Wasn't it both?
Well, it could be, yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I'm not going to completely dismiss this because I think there could possibly be something there. If there is, it's not what the conspiracy theorist idea is, like all commercial aircraft they're outfitted with things and they're spraying stuff left and right. I doubt that. I highly doubt that. But I wouldn't put it past the military to do that for some reason. And I don't know that it's for a destructive purpose. It could be an investigative purpose.
Yeah.
But then again, it could just be a consequence of different fuel types and altitudes, and changes in the atmosphere. So,
the military certainly does do things, on the down low, and for good reason, national security and whatnot. But, like if this is like some deeply held secret, like, and like, just compare this, they couldn't even keep the Manhattan Project secret from Russia. So,
yeah.
Like, how are they keeping this stuff secret?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, I think it's good to question things and ponder ideas and things like that. But there's a point where things can get carried away, and I think people should kind of like occasionally pull back and sort of reanalyze what they're thinking and question those sorts of things before they go down deep down the rabbit hole and end up in Conspiracyville, and pretty soon they're looking out the blinds wearing a tinfoil hat. Not that anybody actually does that, but maybe we'll investigate
breathing
that
Perrier.
Yeah, exactly. But to me, it's a fascinating thing because like, I'm sure people know you know this, that I really love conspiracy theories. Not that I always believe everything, but it's just, God, I love it. It's so fascinating. It's like, oh man, I can't get enough of it. So So I go
It's
into
like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Exactly.
That's a terrible Rod Serling.
Well, at least you tried, you know.
Yeah, I tried to get the lip thing.
I wouldn't try it, but
yeah. Yeah. So that, I don't know. That's probably a pretty good point to wrap up. I think that's probably about all the time we've got.
Yeah, we covered enough things, you know, without going too far into it. But yeah, so if anybody has any questions or comments or critiques, feel free to leave them as always. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy the music on the way out. Keep the conversation
diving with us.
Yeah, and keep the conversation going. Have a great day.
All right.